Good afternoon and thank you for joining us in the latest of our series of interviews with parliamentary candidates standing in both of Warrington's constituencies. Today we're joined by Charlotte Nichols, who is standing for Labour in Warrington North. Charlotte, good afternoon and thank you for joining us. How is the campaign going so far?
Yeah, I mean, it's been an absolute whirlwind so far. Obviously, it's a lot to be sort of selected as a candidate in the midst of a general election campaign, so there's a lot to pick up and sort of learn, but we've been having fun with it, and we've been having people from across the party getting involved, people who are new members, young members, people who are more experienced, and sort of from across the party's broad church, so it's really quite exciting to see everyone sort of come together. And I've been really heartened by the support that I've had both within the local party and obviously in the community when we've been out door knocking.
And obviously your opportunity arose after Helen Jones decided to retire after 22 years as MP in the constituencies. But local members obviously didn't get to vote you in. Do you acknowledge some of the anger among the local party over that?
Yeah, I mean, I would have preferred to have been selected in the normal circumstances in an open shortlist with a hustings, but unfortunately as a candidate that wasn't something that was within my control. You know, if any selection or vacancy that comes up this close to a general election, there is a set procedure by rule in the rule book that was followed here, and no different than, you know, Faisal was selected in 2017 in Warrington South, for example. So, you know, it's obviously not something that I had control over, and I think, you know, it's just part and parcel of, you know, when someone decides to retire that close to the election.
And you obviously grew up in Reading and you were based in London at the time of your selection. Much has been said about you being parachuted into the constituency. Do you believe that candidates should be based and, I guess, from where they are standing?
I think, you know, there's a lot of people in Warrington who either weren't born here or, you know, whose families aren't from here, for example. You know, I'm someone that actually spent most of their adult life, or all of my adult life, barring the last year, in the northwest, in Liverpool and in Salford, which is the neighbouring borough. But obviously, you know, there have been things within Warrington Labour that haven't been the most harmonious over sort of, you know, the last sort of 10 or 15 years. And as someone who is local enough to understand the area well, to have, you know, sort of done work within a lot of the workplaces in the constituency with the job that I do, working for a trade union, but actually to not have any skin in the game of some of those previous disputes and to be able to come in as a sort of fresh start and a clean slate is, I think, something that's really important to getting the best for Warrington moving forward.
And in a recent article, you said it was safe to say that relationships in Warrington Labour haven't been the most harmonious. Following conversations with members here and from your knowledge as well, why do you believe that is? And do you believe Helen Jones was to blame for any of that?
I don't think that it's something that you can single out any one individual for, but I think that, you know, the party culture within Warrington has unfortunately become something that became quite exclusive, I think, or when people, for whatever reason, whether it was sort of cliques that formed or factional groups or these sorts of things, felt that maybe they didn't have a place within the party or that their contribution wasn't something that was wanted and welcomed. And I think, you know, there's been a lot of sort of issues between sort of Warrington North and Warrington South, you know, in between sort of Warrington North and the council at times, and, you know, ultimately for the most part we are all on the same team. You know, we're in the same party, we want the same things. Now, we're not going to agree on everything, but I think there's a way to conduct those sorts of debates in good faith in a comradely fashion that, you know, perhaps got lost over time.
And if Labour does secure power in the election and negotiates a new Brexit deal, puts it back to the people, you said you'd hope to be able to support that deal. Is your preferred choice, I mean, do you believe that the UK should leave the European Union?
Well, look, you know, that's what people in Warrington overwhelmingly voted for, beyond the national picture, where obviously, you know, people voted to leave in the first referendum. Now, I think that the first referendum was about the principle of whether or not people wanted to leave, and a confirmatory vote would be sort of tying up the details of it and making sure that, you know, that's what people wanted and that they had the option to say, if they have, that they've changed their minds. Now, from the conversations that I've been having with people, I don't think people have changed their minds, and ultimately, you know, if I'm lucky enough to be elected as the MP for Warrington, I'm here to stand up for the views of people in Warrington. So it's about getting a good deal that doesn't put the NHS and workers' rights up for sale to Donald Trump or China or anyone else who we're trying to negotiate a trade deal with, but which actually sort of respects the sort of mandate of, the referendum, and makes sure that people who, wanted to remain, for example, aren't materially sort of worse off than they would otherwise have been. I think there is a way of sort of getting through this impasse that we're in, and a compromise that most people could accept, and sort of then move forward as a country together.
And despite that, is there a slight chance that you may back Remain, or are you absolutely ruling out that you would do that in a future second referendum?
I mean, I think it would be very unlikely. Obviously, as I said, if Labour are committed to getting a good deal, I'm committed to supporting, a good deal. But unfortunately, it's not something that's completely within the Labour Party's hands, as obviously, they're only one of the negotiating partners within that negotiation. That deal doesn't yet exist. So you're sort of trading in hypotheticals to say, whether or not you would 100% definitely support it. But, I can't see any reason why I wouldn't support a no deal scenario. But, I've said if it's a good deal, I'll support it and, move forward.
And onto the issue of social media, obviously it opens up new avenues for communication between politicians and voters, but it has quite a dark side with abuse facing many politicians from each party. Have you been subjected to any abuse over recent months and years on social media?
Yeah, unfortunately there's been a sort of long-running harassment campaign against me where, people have either completely chopped the context out of things I've said previously, or sort of willfully misinterpreting what's been said to try and spin it into something else. I have a lot of people sort of send me derogatory comments about my faith as a Jewish woman, but also as someone who converted to Judaism. I actually get quite a lot of anti-Catholic abuse, given that was the sort of faith background I was raised in, which, is obviously very hurtful because it goes to the core of who you are as a person. It's not just about your politics or the way you look or something like that. It's, sort of your fundamental sense of self, which is upsetting. And, you have people that, regardless of how innocuous anything you post is, will sort of come back and sort of send you things that aren't very pleasant. But unfortunately, I think that's the nature of being involved in any kind of public life. I would hope that Twitter would do more about, the abuse and harassment that politicians face. But unfortunately, I suppose, sort of coming into this, I expected to get some.
And some campaigners have highlighted some of your past tweets, some quite strongly worded tweets. Do you regret any of those tweets in the past?
No. I mean, I think that as someone, if you'd asked me a month ago if I'd have considered that I might be standing for political office, I'd have probably laughed. This is something that has all come around very last minute and kind of out of nowhere a little bit. I wasn't someone who was sort of acting as though, that I had this sort of political career in mind and doing everything to, only ever be posting about things like, I don't know, lasagna or something that, so innocuous that no one could possibly have anything to say about it. I have sworn in tweets in the past. I think most people swear, particularly people my age. I think that the way that some of it's been painted as being sort of abusive, for example, is just, ridiculous. But, I've sort of stand by things that I've said in the past on the basis that, I'm not going to try and deny that I've said them. That's part of being a grown-up, I suppose. As
you mentioned, you've obviously converted to Judaism, but on the issue of anti-Semitism, the issue has rocked the Labour Party. Do you believe the Labour leadership, including obviously Jeremy Corbyn, have done enough to tackle anti-Semitism in the party?
I think that procedurally and structurally we've got to near enough the right place now from where we started a few years ago with a complaints system that wasn't fit for purpose, and certainly wasn't fit for purpose for sort of mass complaints, for example. They were bogged down by reports that were being sent in from sort of anyone who said anything untoward on Twitter. People sending that to the Labour Party when these people that, most of the time turned out not to be members or anything to do with the party. It was something that you had cases that were dragging on forever, which obviously isn't fair on the people that have made the complaint, but it's also not fair on the people that are being complained about, because I think everyone has the right to be treated, you know, in a sort of fair, transparent way in a timely fashion. So that was something that it's taken a while to get to where we are, perhaps too long to get there. But on that side of things, I think we're in the right place. The bigger issue now is sort of the cultural piece. It's rebuilding that trust between the Jewish community and the party, and particularly Jewish members in the party, you know, making sure that they feel like the system is one that's working. And that's something that can only sort of be achieved, you know, on a sort of gentle basis going forward. It's, you know, you've got to see these things are working in order to believe that they're working. It's not enough to just be told that they are. And I think that that trust piece is sort of, you know, we're getting there. And the education piece, you know, the party's put around a lot of fantastic stuff to do with resources for identifying anti-Semitism, because actually the Jewish community in Britain is very small. Most people, unless it's something really sort of obvious, don't necessarily know how to identify it when they see it, or what the right terminology is, and so on. So it's about just catching the people who, you know, it's just ignorance rather than any particular malice, giving them the tools to reflect on their own behaviour sometimes, but also to see it in others and be able to challenge that.
And since you were selected, the word nepotism has been flying around quite a bit, with your dad being a senior trade union officer. Has it been quite hurtful seeing some of those claims made against you following your selection?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it's something I find fairly insulting, and I think that it is largely predicated on the fact that I'm a young woman, which, you know, my dad is General Secretary of a trade union called Accord, which has, you know, got something like 25 or 30,000 members. They're a very small trade union. They're not affiliated to the Labour Party. They represent workers in Lloyds Banking Group. You know, I'm not aware that he's ever even met Jeremy Corbyn. So this idea that somehow this selection that, as I said, is exactly the same selection process that anyone anywhere else this close to an election faces, that I've somehow done something wrong, or that, you know, I've been put in on that basis rather than on the basis of, you know, my own hard work and the strength of my sort of CV and the things that I've done previously within the party. You know, it is upsetting, but I suppose that if you're a new face, people are going to say things about you which aren't necessarily true, because, you know, they've not met you to be able to ask you about it. But that's why, you know, we're going out speaking to as many people as possible, allowing people to challenge me on those terms if that's something they want to ask about. And I think be actually reassured by the fact that I was selected because I am the best candidate for Warrington North.
Brexit obviously dominating life and dominating this election as well, but so many other issues facing Warrington North residents. The food bank in Warrington recently forced to double in size due to the demand. Warrington was one of the pilot areas for universal credit, which has caused many issues. In terms of messages that you're getting on the doorsteps, is it purely about Brexit, or there are many local issues that are being brought up to you as well?
No, I mean, there are certain places and certain areas where Brexit comes up more than in other places, but actually the biggest things that people want to talk to us about tend to be around NHS, about social care, about the campaign to save Peel Hall, the need for a new hospital in Warrington, the fact that, you know, buses in Warrington, there's a lot that will take you out of Warrington, but sometimes it's trickier to get a bus that sort of takes you around Warrington. These sorts of things that, you know, universal credit and the personal independence payment in particular is something that I'm hearing stories from people over and over and over again about, you know, the way that it's just inflicted absolute misery on them. And, you know, there are people who want to make this an election about Brexit, but ultimately, whichever party comes in, that's an issue which should be boxed off within, you know, a few months to a year, depending on who ended up sort of having an overall majority, or, you know, what happens after the election. But you're electing people for a 5-year term of office, so what about the rest of their domestic policy? I think it's only Labour that's talking about some of these big issues in a way that the other parties are happy to just make it a Brexit election.
And Peel Hall, as you just mentioned, what is your stance on Peel Hall? Would you like to see that site protected from development?
Yeah, I've been very clear, you know, with people on the doorstep, you know, in letters that I've written to sort of residents who'll be the most affected locally, that I absolutely unequivocally oppose the development of Peel Hall. I think that there is a need for more affordable housing in Warrington, but that what is being proposed there isn't the type of housing or the quality of housing that the area needs, that it's a green space that, you know, we need to protect and keep more of. There's all the issues with sort of traffic and air quality, because actually the sort of road in the proposals in and out of the site is a residential street. It's very narrow, and throwing sort of 1,200 homes worth of extra traffic onto that, when traffic down there is already a nightmare. You know, the infrastructure just isn't there to support it. There's a lot of places closer towards the town centre that could and should be redeveloped before you'd start looking at that. Now, obviously, Satnam has been putting in the same sort of planning application for, you know, near enough 30 years now. They're very litigious. They've been taking things to the High Court. And, you know, that's something that I think local residents actually need the clarity on the future of that area that they're not getting at the moment, because they're just putting in application after application after application and hoping that eventually, you know, one will stick and they'll be able to do that. I'm prepared to stand with residents in their long-running campaign to save Peel Hall, and that's something that, if I'm lucky enough to be elected as the MP, would be pretty close to the top of my agenda in terms of local issues.
And as you know, since the seat was created in 1983, always been held by Labour and been deemed a safe Labour seat. Is there any complacency among yourself or Labour members in the constituency that it's going to be an easy election victory on December the 12th?
No, I mean, obviously it's a December general election anyway. You know, you tend to find that turnout is squeezed by the fact that no one wants to be trudging up to the polling station in the dark and the cold. But, you know, we've been out 3 times a day, every day, speaking to residents on the doors, going to meet them where they are, whether it's in community centres, school gates, you know, the food bank, trying to meet as many people as possible, because I think it's only the Labour Party in Warrington who are saying that, you know, we're not prepared to speak for people without speaking to them first. Other people are relying on the fact that, you know, because of their policies about Brexit or whatever else, that, you know, they don't have to be going out there and meeting people. That's not something that we're prepared to do. You know, we'll never take anyone's support or anyone's vote for granted. And I don't think in our current sort of political and economic climate that there is any such thing as a safe seat.
And if Labour failed to secure power in the election, would it then be time for Jeremy Corbyn to step aside as party leader?
Of course. You know, I think if he wins an overall majority, that he's earned the right to be Prime Minister just as any other leader of any other party. But if he doesn't, that, you know, the Labour Party is far more important than any one individual, and it would be time to sort of pass the baton on to someone else.
And just to finish, probably an impossible task to take your mind off politics and Brexit at the minute, but what do you try and do to do that?
I mean, I'm not getting a lot of personal time at the moment. Obviously, it's sort of 18-hour days on the campaign, but trying to make sure that, you know, get a bath with a lush bath or a face mask. You know, sort of beer to unwind with the campaign team as often as we can over the course of the campaign.
Thanks, Charlotte.
Thank you.